Hi, welcome back to Health Score. Today we're on the topic of your numbers, and we're talking about the first lab value, hemoglobin A1c. The recommendation, keep your hemoglobin A1c below 5%. The source is this large clinical trial that showed that having a hemoglobin A1c 5% or greater confers an increase in mortality. And hemoglobin A1c is your average blood sugar over the past 3 months. This test measures glycolation of the red blood cells, and that's a way of measuring your average blood sugar over the past 3 months. Now, when your hemoglobin A1c is 6.5 or greater, you have diabetes. When it's 5.7 or greater, you have prediabetes. When it's 5 or greater, you have an increased risk to your health, not only an increased risk of progressing to prediabetes and diabetes, but an increased risk of mortality, even if you never cross the threshold to prediabetes or diabetes. That's why I'm intervening here. That's why I'm recommending to take action if your A1c is 5 or greater. That I'm kind of an outlier when it comes to my colleagues. Most providers, doctors don't bother with people until they have a diagnosis of prediabetes, or they might even wait till they get a diagnosis of diabetes. The reason for my recommendation of intervening if it's 5 or greater is because the mortality data shows that it affects your health. How exactly does average blood sugar being elevated or elevated hemoglobin A1c affect your health? Well, what happens when you eat is your blood sugar rises and insulin is produced. Over time, if your blood sugar is repeatedly spiking, your insulin is repeatedly spiking, your blood is chronically full of high sugar levels, which directly affect the vessels in your body, including your eyes and your kidneys. But also you develop insulin resistance, which leads to obesity. You develop inflammation, which leads to all sorts of outcomes like increased risk of heart attack, stroke, and kidney failure. So enough of the bad news. What can you do about it? Well, as I've said with the topics of body weight and blood pressure so far, having a good foundation from the previous sections of Health Score, the diet section, the psychological health section, the physical activity section, will be most of the work you'll need to do to get hemoglobin A1c under control. So reviewing what we've already discussed in prior lessons, maintaining a body mass index under 25 is key. From the physical activity section, it's been shown that prolonged sitting increases insulin resistance and leads to high blood sugars. So limiting the total sitting time to not more than 8 hours and limiting any episode of sitting to not more than 30 minutes, breaking it up with at least a 1-minute standing break. Sleep at least 7 hours every night. When we are sleep deprived, we're going into our fight or flight response, which pumps blood sugar into our system, and that leads to chronically elevated high blood sugars. So getting an adequate night's sleep is key to lowering hemoglobin A1c. So now we're going to talk about topics that are not covered in previous lessons that are specific to hemoglobin A1c. As I said, hemoglobin A1c is a measure of your average blood sugar over the past 3 months. Your average blood sugar is elevated when you eat foods with sugar in them. They are turned directly into glucose in your bloodstream, causing high blood sugars, high insulin levels, insulin resistance, which leads to your body having even more difficulty dealing with blood sugar in the next time your blood sugar spikes. So what should be eliminated from your diet? Basically anything with added sugar, including beverages, soda, juice, cereal, protein bars, baked goods, candy, ice cream. The sweetest thing in your diet should be a whole fruit. Even taking like agave nectar, which I guess is a fruit, and putting it in a granola bar is still concentrating sugar. Honey is another example. Even though it's all natural, it's still concentrated sugar. So you want your only source of sugar to be in its natural fiber constituent form, otherwise known as fruit. This seems like a tall order to eliminate sweetened foods from your diet, but our taste buds have been thrown off by a hyper sweet food environment. So we don't think of a blueberry as sweet because our palate has been shifted to only think of a Snickers bar as sweet. But if Snickers bar is no longer a part of our regular repertoire of foods, then we become more sensitized to sweetness in natural foods, and a blueberry tastes that much better. Another food component to consider is artificial sweetener. Now, artificial sweetener doesn't directly raise blood sugar, but what it does is it signals to the vagus nerve, to the gut microbiome, that what you're eating is sweet. And that has the same effect on your risk for diabetes and your insulin resistance as food that's actually sweet. It changes the microbiome in the gut to predispose you to having trouble handling blood sugar, to handling foods that are sweet. So it predisposes to diabetes without actually raising blood sugar, and increases A1c without actually raising blood sugar. Next is to eliminate refined grains. This was a topic already covered in the whole grain section. When you're eating a grain, it should look exactly the way it does in nature. So if you're eating a grain, whole grain bread, for example, there's no whole grain loaves of bread hanging around in nature. That grain, that wheat has been milled into flour before it reaches your mouth. Anytime a grain has been milled into flour, its surface area is dramatically increased. So it's much easier to break down, turns to sugar immediately in your bloodstream, and that leads to blood sugar spikes. Beer is like the poster child for refined grain. It doesn't even have any substance, it's just liquid. And that's going to be lead to a direct increase in blood sugar. White rice is another example. It used to be brown. It's been stripped of its fiber and its germ to make it white. And finally, I say limit starchy vegetables. I think the best way to approach fruits and vegetables is to go for a variety. If you only eat broccoli, which some would consider the best vegetable, that doesn't set you up for eating broccoli for the rest of your life. You're just going to get sick of broccoli. If broccoli is part of a combination of vegetables, that's the best way of maintaining a love of vegetables in general. So I don't recommend eliminating foods like potatoes and corn, but I recommend a variety of fruits and vegetables that can include potatoes and corn, but not overdoing it. And finally, there's shortening your eating window. So your eating window is the time from when you start eating to when you finish eating. An eating window for someone who has breakfast at 8 a.m. and dinner before 8 p.m. would be 12 hours. If you can shorten your eating window to 8 hours, meaning let's say you skip breakfast and your first meal is at noon and your last meal is before 8 p.m., you're actually fasting for 16 hours. Between 8 p.m. and noon the next day, you're not eating. That normalization, that lack of food in your body normalizes blood sugar, helps control hemoglobin A1c, and is also an effective strategy for weight loss. So this is the recommendation in summary. Keep hemoglobin A1c below 5%. I would say it's very hard to do because most people are in the 5 or greater, but there's a significant health benefit to having a hemoglobin A1c under 5, as you can see by the risks of an elevated A1c. The main strategies are to lose weight, avoid prolonged sitting, get enough sleep, avoid the foods that have added sugar, artificial sweetener, that have refined grains, that have had the fiber removed, limiting starchy vegetables, and working on shortening your total eating window. 8 hours is the ideal, but if you're eating 12 hours a day and you shorten it to 11, that's an improvement. Hope this video has been helpful. In managing A1C, this measure is one of the most important in health score. I wish you the best of luck in your progress. Thank you. Have a great day.